At 65 years old, Godzilla's a franchise which just won't die, be it the movie series, which is hitting over 30 live-action films, TV shows, comic books, video games, and even its own anime trilogy. But let's be honest, those are just the projects that did get made. Today we're going to be looking at the films which didn't, but it's going to be in 5 parts. We're going to be covering every Godzilla film which didn't get made, starting with Bride of Godzilla, all the way to the original 2012 version of Godzilla. However, I will state, if there is a film which has not been made but there's not really good credible sources, I will not be counting it. So the Godzilla vs. Wolfman fan film, which was apparently originally a concept, I will not be covering that, but I will be covering some stuff which is at least acknowledged by Toho in some way. Anyway, let's begin with the Showa era. To start off, there are earlier versions of the original Godzilla film, with the ghostly whale that came from the sea to attack Tokyo, and the giant monster from 2,000 miles below the sea, both by Etsy Tsuburaya. But I won't be covering them properly as they're not really Godzilla movies yet, but I did feel the need to give them a quick shout out, as without these ideas, Godzilla would be a very different monster movie to how it is today, and these movies essentially set the groundwork to allow Ishiro Honda to create his Godzilla movie. But anyway, let's continue. Shortly after Godzilla raids again, Toho wanted to make a third Godzilla film and hired Hideo Uganami to write the film. It centered around the return of Godzilla and Anguirus, who attack cities because, you know, that's what they do. A scientist builds what's called a robot daughter made in the likeness of his foster daughter to battle them. The film introduces the idea of a hollow earth, something which would later be used for Rodan and even 2019's Godzilla King of the Monsters, where many Godzilla and Anguirus monsters live with mermaids. The film also introduces the Meganulons, which went on to Rodan, as parasites. The robot daughter battles them, breaking Anguirus' jaw like in Mechagodzilla. Godzilla falls in love with the robot lady, because now we're apparently in a King Kong movie, taking her into his lair, and then she turns out to be a nuke and kills him. Yeah, the film's batshit insane, and honestly, I'm not shocked it wasn't made. Apparently it was cancelled due to the film's creators not wanting another rush sequel, which is fair enough. Honestly though, this concept just seems way too out there, even for a franchise focused on a dinosaur which, breathes atomic breath. The writer ended up going on to make a film called H-Man, so good for him. And the film even got a sort of redraft in the 1970s, but really not much is known about that version except it was on the table at some point. And the film itself may have influenced the giant sea louse, which ended up in The Return of Godzilla, or Godzilla 1985. Volcano Monsters is essentially what Gigantus, the fire monster, the United States version of Godzilla Raids Again, became. The film was just going to turn all the Godzilla fight scenes, with him versing Anguirus from the original film, and have brand new footage centered around it, so it's essentially like watching a clip show with just a bunch of stock footage, but the film itself is going to be brand new. Toho did seem to like the idea, at least from a financial standpoint, and they signed off on the project, even sending the production company a Godzilla and Anguirus suit for new footage. That's how much they cared. But the company went bust and the suits got lost, so the film was never made. Instead, we got Gigantus the Fire Monster, which somehow actually seems like a lesser of two evils, but still, little is very actually known about the film's storyline, but it did seem to shake Toho's confidence as their next kaiju movie was Varan, which was as cheap and rushed as they come, and honestly it wasn't really until Mothra when they started to show care for the kind of monster movies that we used to make. King Kong vs. Frankenstein and King Kong vs. Prometheus are very weird films, and the only reason why I'm mentioning this is because of what they led to. Now, originally Frankenstein vs. King Kong was seen as a direct sequel to the 1933 King Kong movie, which in itself is really fucking weird, because it removes the son of Kong from the timeline, it brings King Kong back from the dead somehow, and I know it's a Frankenstein plot, which is all about resurrecting the dead, but how fucking weird is that as a concept? But even stranger, the idea itself was stolen. As in, the concept itself was stolen. The original idea was to have two of cinema's greatest monsters battling each other, something we've heard thousands of times before Godzilla fans. No one wanted to make the film though, and the concept was eventually sold to Toho, who ended up splitting the movie into two concepts, which ended up becoming King Kong vs Godzilla, and Frankenstein vs a Human Vapor, which in itself has its own massive complicated issues, which I will go through in a couple of entries. Continuation King Kong vs Godzilla was essentially just a sequel to King Kong vs Godzilla. Not much else is actually known about the film, and Toho scrapped it very quickly at one point for really unclear reasons. It's rumoured that the film's budget was actually quite high, but nothing's ever been fully set in stone. The script never even got leaked to the public. We're not even sure if the script was fully finished or even started writing, so literally nothing is known about the film's plot. So that's literally it. The film didn't get made for some reason, so Toho decided to go back to the idea of making a Frankenstein movie, which leads us into the next entry. Now, for Frankenstein vs a Human Vapor, or Frankenstein vs Godzilla as it ended up being, this is where things get really complicated. The original concept for Frankenstein vs a Human Vapor would have been a direct sequel to Toho's The Human Vapor, with Ishiro Honda even attached to direct the film, but it was very suddenly and quietly cancelled by Toho for unknown reasons and reworked into Frankenstein vs Godzilla. Maybe it was just that the Human Vapor was a very unknown character and we need to use something a bit bigger, but even at this time Godzilla wasn't the big box office groundbreaker he is nowadays, so it's still a bit of an odd idea. The film was originally seen as a sequel to King Kong vs Godzilla, as well as possibly the 1930s Universal Frankenstein movie, which is so confusing because once again, Frankenstein died, and all the Universal sequels acknowledge this. The film ended up being very loosely reworked and released as Frankenstein vs. Baragon, which is not a direct sequel to that film, with many of the plot elements kind of staying the same. However, Frankenstein vs. Godzilla would have had one big difference. Godzilla was the hero. Well, technically anti-hero, but this would have been the first time that Godzilla was actually portrayed as a heroic character, something which wouldn't happen until next year's Godzilla and Ghidorah movie. But the final version of Frankenstein vs. Baragon ended up also changing this by having Frankenstein as the hero, whilst Baragon was the villain. But despite being a sure thing, Toho just wasn't sure about Godzilla being portrayed as a heroic character yet, and decided to put Godzilla up against Mothra instead, which was released a couple of years prior to really good rave reviews, leading to a fan favourite Mothra vs. Godzilla, one of my personal favourites too. So, in the end, for this very complicated series of events, it did end up with two pretty decent films. Godzilla vs Batman and King Kong vs Ebirah is the first time, but definitely not last time, we have two very different films which have nothing to do with each other, but trying to be released the same year. Firstly is King Kong vs Ebirah, which was essentially Ebirah Horror of the Deep, the 7th Godzilla movie, but with King Kong as the main kaiju instead of Godzilla. Most of the film is exactly the same right down to the plot, with the only major difference being that Godzilla used his atomic breath to kill Ebirah, whilst in the original version, King Kong was going to use his brute strength. Batman vs Godzilla though is a very strange concept, with some even saying that the film was never real to begin with, but there's a lot of conflicting reports on this, with even Toho changing their opinion at times, so we're going to roll with it. The film would have focused on the supervillain controlling Godzilla to cause mayhem, leading to Batman stopping the villain. Then Batman, Batgirl and Robin using vehicles and gadgets to stop Godzilla. Batman even climbs up Godzilla, plants a bomb on him and knocks him out so the Japanese can build a spaceship around him and send him into space. By the way, this is not the last time we hear of people basically making Godzilla into a rocket ship, but we'll get to that in a good few years' time. Now, I'm not a Batman fan by any stretch, the only real Batman movies I like is the Tim Burton duology, but I am very sad that I didn't see this at some point in my life. Literally nothing else is known about the movie, including its cancellation, apart from its writer being a Japanese writer instead of an American one, who wrote a lot of the other Showa Godzilla movies, and Ebirah being the first Godzilla film released in 1966. But there was also apparently an American version of the film with an American writer, but even less information is on that one, apart from that it involved Batman and Batgirl fighting Godzilla. This is a very complicated thing, and very little is known about the project, but for what is online, it's very interesting to read, and I would definitely recommend that some people can check it out. The All Monsters Attack Directive was essentially the precursor to Destroy All Monsters, which would have featured a very different human plot and a lot more monsters. Literally nothing else is known about the film, apart from it being cancelled due to budgetary problems, and only Monster Island from the original concept actually ending up in the film. Honestly, it sucks this version wasn't made. I personally have a massive issue with Destroy All Monsters. I do not like that film at all. The sci-fi plot is boring as hell, and the light of all monsters is, well, it's a lie. And this version sounds like a huge shame to have lost, but I do understand from the monster's perspective, cutting a lot of them out, why it was done for budgetary stuff. Because at this time, this was the most expensive Godzilla movie, and it really was depending on the box office success since the rest of the franchise wasn't doing well. It is a shame though, because this movie sounded like it could have been awesome, and I really wish that in some other reality, this version was released instead. Kicking off in the 1970s, we have what I like to call the 1972 fuckery. Now, let's just start from the beginning. Godzilla vs. a Mutant Starfish was the first idea for a direct sequel to Godzilla vs. Hedorah, with a giant mutant starfish replacing Hedorah. The film would have focused mainly around pollution, but was cancelled by the film's creator, who wanted to do Godzilla vs. Hedorah 2. The mutant starfish would apparently later go on to influence the toxic starfish in Rebirth of Mothra 2, as well as gets its own fan name. Shortly after that concept fell through, we got Godzilla vs. Hedorah 2, which would be exactly what it sounded like, another absolutely insane 1970s Godzilla film focused on Hedorah. The film got cancelled due to franchise producer Tomioka Tanaka apparently really hating Godzilla vs. Hedorah and ended up firing Banner, the film's director, banning him from ever making another Godzilla film, although Banner himself would try to resurrect his project many times before his very, very untimely death, as I will cover later on. Although he did end up helping create the Monsterverse, so that's one thing. Godzilla vs. Red Moon is a very strange film which may have influenced two completely different movies. The concept was a collaboration between Toho and Tsuburaya Productions, a company formed by Etsuji Tsuburaya, who helped make the original Godzilla film. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but a flying kaiju and a walking kaiju meet up and mate. Their child is killed by a human, causing them to rampage even more than they already were doing, with Godzilla appearing basically last minute and killing them both. So yeah, it's Godzilla 2014, but some fans even speculate that another Toho and Tsuburaya Productions film was made because of some not being created, although there's very little evidence of that. But who knows, maybe this film did end up being made into two completely different movies, and that's a pretty cool idea, since I'll be honest, reading the concept of this film, it's a good one, and I can tell why Toho really wanted to use it, at least at one point, in the Godzilla franchise. Godzilla vs. the Space Monsters Earth Defense Directive is not only a pretty badass title, which would have been a pretty badass film. I mean, it featured Godzilla, Anguirus, and a new kaiju called Majin Tuol, going against King Ghidorah Gigan and a new villain, Megalon. The film centered around the building of Godzilla Tower in a theme park by some aliens, so yes, it was essentially split into two different films, with Godzilla vs. Gigan taking most of the film's plot and characters, whilst Godzilla vs. Megalon took the scraps of the film and swapped out Majin Tuol for Jet Jaguar, but the film was pretty much both of those but on a much bigger scale. It sounded a lot better than the two films we got as well, especially much better than Godzilla vs. Megalon, but it is understandable as Toho kept slashing Godzilla film budgets as much as they bloody could in the 70s. Still, it sucks and sounds like a pretty great concept. Some fans even speculate that Majin Tuol would have ended up kind of becoming King Caesar, as they're both statue-like characters, they're both statue-like kaijus, and it's a massive shame that it didn't end up being used properly, because it kind of would have saved the back end of the Showa period before Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. But pretty much everything in this film was eventually used, which is a good thing, because at least nothing was wasted. The return of King Ghidorah was essentially the second version of Godzilla vs. the Space Monsters, but with Majin Tuol, Anguirus, and Megalon being completely written out. Replaced by Rodan and Varan on Godzilla's team, with another dragon kaiju called Mogu replacing Megalon. Apart from that, it's a pretty similar plot. Godzilla Tower and all, but it does have some new abilities for Gigan. The title for Return of King Ghidorah would be used for both the next treatment of Godzilla vs. Gigan, as well as another cancelled project in the Heisei area. The title eventually sort of got used with the German title of the third rebirth of Mothra film, Mothra, King Ghidorah Returns, so hey, at least it did get used at some point. Godzilla vs. Gigan, The Return of King Ghidorah is the final cancelled version of Godzilla vs. Gigan to end up being scrapped. This time swapping Varan and Rodan for Anguirus and a larval Mothra, with Mogu being swapped once again for Megalon, meaning that overall, only Majin Tuol was not going to return from the original version, and the only real change from this film to the final version is the removal of Mothra and Megalon, with most of the plot staying pretty close to the original. There's a couple of points being moved over to Jet Jaguar vs Megalon, aka Godzilla vs Megalon, but this version was written by a new writer, with the title of the final film being Godzilla vs King Ghidorah, Earth Attack Directive, before being changed very last minute by Toho to Godzilla vs Gigan. Once again, big shame, and apparently the only reason why these three concepts were cut is just solely on the budget. They didn't have enough money to fully flesh out this kind of concept, which is why it ends up being split into Godzilla vs Gigan, which had a higher budget, and Godzilla vs Megalon, which had basically no budget, which I will get onto now. In 1973, Jet Jaguar vs Megalon was a concept. The plot is basically the same as Godzilla vs Megalon, but not much else is known about the project apart from Godzilla and Gigan being brought in quite close to last minute with a very rough revision of the script leading to a finished film, which honestly isn't too shocking since neither Godzilla or Gigan are very big players until the final fight, and if they were written out, it wouldn't seem too out of place in the film. For the next two films, Giant Monsters Converge in Okinawa, Showdown in Zampinski, and Showdown in Zampinski, Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla, the plots really don't change much. It focuses on some ape-like aliens who create a robotic monster to attack Earth. The main difference is that Giant Monsters Converge also involved a lot more Anguirus as well as Mothra, with Mechagodzilla even getting a different name. Now for the second version of it, Mechagodzilla gets his proper name, Mothra is swapped out for King Bolgan, Gigan teams up with Mechagodzilla, and Anguirus still plays a huge role. The film mostly differs from the final project by these monsters, as well as the film's title both being changed. The film obviously was eventually called Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla, with Anguirus only appearing at the start of the film, Gigan being cut out completely, and King Bolgan being reworked into King Caesar. This concept did sound pretty cool, but I can see why it was cut down. The simplicity of Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla is one of the best parts about the film, and this does seem a lot like a big, cluttered convergence once again, similar to the last two movies, so it is understandable why they did this, for both budgetary and storyline reasons. To end the Showa era, I wanted to talk about the original version of Terror of Mechagodzilla, which isn't very different to the final version, but had one pretty huge difference. Titanosaurus was not in the film, with a working title rumoured to be Godzilla vs the Titans, which would have had two Titan creatures instead of one. They could encircle around each other's necks to become extremely powerful, but it was cut down for budgetary reasons, which would have been awesome to see, but once again quite understandable, especially when the film ended up massively underperforming and killing off the franchise. Personally, I liked the film, but this little extra addition probably could have actually helped it when it comes to box office numbers. So that is it for part 1 of my Unmade Godzilla movies, the Showa era. If you did enjoy this, please be sure to like and subscribe. I should have a next part coming out at some point. I know I've stopped uploading, and there is a reason behind that. There's a lot of stress at university, and I just couldn't really get myself to properly make this kind of stuff, those kind of reviews anymore. So I thought I'd do this just to try and see how it lands with, obviously, an audience, and with me personally for editing. If I don't make a second part to this, I didn't like it. It's kind of as simple as that. So I hope you did enjoy. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time, hopefully for part 2 of this series. Goodbye!